We will review the literary elements and analysis questions for Harrison Bergeron. This story was published in 1961. And from our last lessons, we know Kurt Vonnegut's background, that he was a prisoner of war during World War II, which inspired many of his writings, and he was an outspoken critic of the military-industrial complex. This story would have first appeared in 1961 in a magazine and then published in his book, Welcome to the Monkey House. And when we are looking, his stories published at the height of the Cold War, when the United States and Soviet Union were rivals. Many Americans feared communism. So communism is a system that promises society without classes, social classes, which critics said really meant forcing everyone to be the same. As of this point, you have Cuba and North Korea and Vietnam would be the closest to actual communist countries. China is technically not a communist government. Well, no, economy. Their government is communistic. In a communist government, you wouldn't vote for your leaders. So the Communist Party of China is only one party. And then they pick the leader, Xi Jinping, amongst each other. So citizens can vote, though, on specific laws for their government, their local government, but they don't vote for their leaders. Leaders in a communist government are chosen on merit. So we have the television was fairly new and quickly becoming the center of American life. We see that in the story. He was also somewhat of a critic of technology and what it could do to society. Now, this story is not an attack on equal rights. In 1961, the civil rights movement was fighting for genuine equality, equal treatment under the law. Vonnegut's satire targets something different, the mistaken idea that equality means forcing everyone to be identical, by dragging talented people down instead of lifting everyone up. Because if we notice here, there'll be some allusions. Thor, the god of thunder, when Harrison throws out of his handicaps, the narrator said he would have awed Thor. You have Diana Moon Glampers. Diana is a Roman goddess of the moon and the hunt. The handicapper general lives up to the name. She hunts down Harrison and shoots him. The Dark Ages, named for the Middle Ages, once viewed as a time when learning and progress stalled. George warns that competition would send society back to the Dark Ages, because 2081 is a dark age for the human mind. And then you have a 21 gun salute, which is the highest military honor. Emperor, Empress, Barons, Dukes, titles from old European monarchy, a system that was built on rank and inherited privilege. So you would be the king if your dad was a king. The exact opposite of forced equality. Harrison doesn't want fairness. He swings to the other extreme and crowns himself. Then we have these references to the amendments. At the time this story was written, the Constitution only had 23 amendments. So this is how Kurt Vonnegut builds a dystopian setting. He takes things that people would know. People would generally know how many amendments we have. Now, actually, there's only 27. So we actually didn't have that many more. And I think some of them are getting repealed, but whatever. So here you have your plot breakdown. If you wanted to review that, the exposition, that's before any events happen. We learn how George and Hazel Bergeron live. They're watching TV. We also learn that their son had been taken by the government, which that was definitely the inkling of our conflict. And you would say an exposition gives the inkling of the conflict. And then we know Hazel suggests he lighten his 47-pound handicap. George refuses, warning that cheating would unravel society. And that's when our event, they have a news bulletin that their son Harrison has escaped from jail. And then our climax is when Harrison storms in the studio, declares himself the emperor, tears off the handicaps built to hold 5,000 pounds. That's also the satire, because he's wearing the clown nose, all these things. Then the falling action, Diana Moon Glampers comes in and shoots him. Then you get to the ending where George, missing the shooting while getting a beer, returns to find Hazel crying. Neither can remember why. Forget sad things, says George. I always do. And then they basically immediately forget it, which is a very odd way to say that. At first it seemed like her handicap was supposed to be there to make her not be able to, or well, George's, to make him not be able to think. But then if Hazel doesn't have a handicap in her brain, then that just means she might be suffering from some type of like short-term memory loss, because hers is a little weird. And also, what we should know about the term handicap in general. This had a different meaning back in the 1960s. So Vonnegut builds this by inventing the word. Well, he doesn't invent the word, but it was used in golf or racehorsing. A handicap is a penalty given to stronger competitors to even out the contest. Vonnegut takes the sports idea and imagines government applying to human beings. So how we see that word in our present day, 2026, is different than how they would have seen this word in the 1960s. So when you have handicap or general, she'd be in charge of forcing everyone to be equal. The title copies real ones like Attorney General and Surgeon General. So the Attorney General is the head lawyer in the country, and then the Surgeon General is supposed to be the head doctor, which makes a force sameness sound like an ordinary public service. HG men would be the handicap or general agents, a play on G-men, 1930s slang for FBI agents. Mental handicap radio, a small ear radio. Then you have the handicap bags, and then under handicap, not wearing enough handicaps for your natural ability. In 2081, being too talented is a literal crime, and Harrison jailed for it. You have foreshadowing this. Oh, when he hears the 21 gun salute, foreshadows his son. And the symbolism, the handicaps stand for force, mediocrity. The ballerina's hideous mask hides her beauty. Harrison's gravity-defying dance stands for the full human potential from the suppressed government, or the oppressive government. But then the oppressive government succeeds in suppressing the people. And we have this situational irony. A society devoted to total equality is run by one woman with total power, and she enforces equality by shooting people. You could say that is ironic. And then, of course, you see Hazel, who needs no handicaps at all, is a model citizen. And we already kind of said Hazel seems as though she has some sort of very serious memory issue where it seems as though the government purposely wanted people to be less intelligent than, for whatever reason. We can look at that in our questions. And the satire, the whole story marks the idea that fairness means making everyone equal. And finally equal, but it is a world of mass weights, constant surveillance, and government violence. So, is that going to be fair? He would be critiquing government policies, forcing people to be a certain way. All right, so now with the questions, as long as you are adding textual evidence to your responses, you will not be wrong. And you would probably want to have 2 to 3 sentences for these. So I might say, what do you think of the government's policy of assigning more handicaps to some people than others? What do the handicaps enforce? How do the handicaps enforce sameness rather than equality? Well, interpretations, you could say that the handicaps aren't raising people up. They're only dragging people down. So that wouldn't be equality. You don't have any opportunities. This means equal rights and opportunity. This would erase differences instead of protecting them. So you could say hiding people's good looks or their voices if they're a talented singer or their athleticism. This would be holding people back from pursuing what they might be good at in life, like career-wise. The policy punishes people for gifts they were born with, treating talent like a crime. Ironically, the system isn't equal. That would be the biggest thing. Because if Diana can go in there and do whatever she wants, we would assume this is unfair. And those in charge aren't handicapped, and they're able to function in their day-to-day lives and are probably most likely profiting off the misery of the population. Except the population doesn't even know they're miserable because they can't remember anything. We have Harrison entering the studio. He is basically ordering everyone to take off their handicaps, but they are reluctant to. They're kind of looking at him like, what is going on here? Well, if we were going to say why, we might say that fear of the government. And we could also possibly say fear of Harrison, because he comes in there and starts to say a lot of crazy things. I am the emperor. Do you hear? I am the emperor. Everybody must do what I say at once. That is somewhat of a threatening way to go about saying all that. Say they might be also a little nervous about how Harrison was acting, but then definitely conditioning by the government, because we saw how George was reluctant to take his off, even though he was home alone, and the fear of the fines. So in these oppressive governments, you might say that fining people is a way to keep them in a state of poverty, because if you're always struggling to pay your bills, it might be difficult to fight against the government. And we have, how does the government enforce handicaps? How does it enforce order? Well, that goes into the fines and the constant surveillance, physical devices. Then we also see that if people get really out of hand, they're just immediately executed, as we had with Harrison. Fear-based self-policing. George refuses to cheat even at home when no one's watching. So this is certainly something that's ingrained. He also actually believes this in his mind, because he's saying we would be back in the Dark Ages if we didn't. So you could call that indoctrination, propaganda. They're watching the television all the time. That's basically the only source of media they're getting. And they had also said it was a state-sponsored show. They had the news bulletin at one point. So you can see that whatever the government wants to put on TV is what's going to be put on TV. So anything you want to say about how they're enforcing it? Surveillance, the propaganda on the TV, laws, fines, but with no due process, trials, constitutional limits, the world lacks. Then we have, what should the future look like? Implications. They're saying, in the context of the story, what should the future look like? What implications does this story have for how people and the government should act? Well, this would seem like a very authoritarian government here. So a future that protects equal rights without demanding identical people. So if you're giving some people rights, you shouldn't be taking rights away from other people. Citizens should stay alert and think critically. George and Hazel would be a very good example, but you do have... It's difficult for people, especially we would assume the government's running the education. So we can't always blame George and Hazel for their lack of critical thinking, because George, he has his sounds played into his brain, and Hazel, we can assume she was educated in whatever dystopian system they've created here. Government power needs limits. Good intentions, equality can justify terrible control. So the government was able to get all these people to live in constant fear and with debilitating disabilities, one could say. But they believe it. Balance matters. Harrison's self-crowned empire isn't the answer either. So Harrison's actions, you could say, almost made other people think it was justified. Because Harrison... he has been radicalized by this government, so he feels there's no negotiations and it should just be taken down. So without any middle ground between the government and the people, that is going to be problematic as well. We had the dance scene, which was one of the longer parts of our story, when she had no apology, which was unfair for her voice. Oh wait, that was the other one. When he comes, that must be Harrison. You have thrust his thumbs and bar a padlock. This is when he's taking off his rubber ball nose. I shall now select my empress. A moment passed. The ballerina, swaying like a willow. Lots of similes and figurative language used in this. She was blindingly beautiful. That would be hyperbole, because obviously he's not blinded. Now, said Harrison, taking her hand, shall we show the people the meaning of the word dance? Music, he commanded. So you have the whole scene of them dancing, and then they're almost like flying. They shifted their weight to their toes. Harrison placed his big hands on the girl's tiny waist, letting her sense of weightlessness so it would soon be hers. And then in explosive joy and grace, into the air they sprang. Not only were the laws of the land abandoned, but the laws of gravity and the laws of motion as well. This almost makes them seem like whimsical superheroes of sorts. They reeled, whirled, swiveled, flounced, capered, gamboled, and spun. Gamboled. They leaped like deer on the moon. More figurative language, a simile. The studio ceiling was 30 feet high, but each leap brought the dancers nearer to it. It became their obvious intention to kiss the ceiling. They kissed it. Then, neutrally gravity, with love and pure will, they remained suspended in air, inches below the ceiling. And they kissed each other for a long, long time. So, that was quite a description there of their dance. When we want to say, why do we think it was included in such detail? It shows what humanity loses under the handicaps, beauty, grace, excellence, made literal as flight. The dance breaks even the laws of gravity, symbolizing limitless human potential when freed. I guess you could kind of look at that like AI in a way. If AI can have, well, something that tech CEOs say is they need free reign to develop AI. So maybe this story could kind of use an example like that, a real life example. Its beauty makes a sudden shotgun blast more shocking and tragic because they were kissing, so it was kind of romantic. Unless, I don't know, we don't really know how the ballerina actually felt about that. So if we look at the ballerina's perspective that she was forced to do all that and then go up there and kiss Harrison, then it's kind of disturbing. And then we might even say that Harrison might have, I don't really see how we could say Harrison was a hero, because his ideology was he should take over the world or the government. And then we have it's the only moment of genius art in the story, full of cheap, silly, false performances. So that was a true performance. The other ones, they had the people that weren't very good at singing or weren't very good at dancing. Well, actually, they had the ballerinas and they had to wear the handicap. So and then we have, why did Vonnegut write? What's he ridiculing? Now, you really can come up with this you don't really know what he truly meant unless we look it up. He would have said he was mainly, most of his writing was for the left. So the left would be more like the wealthy should pay more in taxes, there should be open borders, gay LGBTQ rights, and funding for social programs like housing, food, schools, daycares, things like that, helping working families, rather than like a giant military budget. That would be more of right-leaning. Right-leaning is the government should be buying military equipment and investing in things that everyone can use, not just those in need. And you could also say the right would also be if people come up with a business, like you have Jeff Bezos with Amazon, then that's his business and he earned it and he deserves to reap all the profits for that. So that would be kind of like this capitalism idea, that the government should stay out and shouldn't be taxing people so much. So normally Kurt Vonnegut is on the socialism side, the side for the wealthy paying high taxes and distributing the money to those in need in the economy, or those giving people opportunities, like funding schools is going to eventually, when the students grow up and they can contribute more to the society. Funding healthcare, that's another one. Left would believe that healthcare should be universal or free, whereas capitalist would say people can afford their own healthcare, it's not the government's job. So you have, it isn't moonbeams to talk of modest plenty of hope. They have it in Sweden, and in a Address to Wheaton College, he even quoted Karl Marx, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. When asked in the interview how he would have campaigned against Nixon, he responded, "I would have set the poor against the rich." In the letter, Vonnegut indicated that foregoing sympathy with losers influenced Harrison Bergeron. If the misreadings of this text were valid, then the implied author's sympathy would be for Harrison Bergeron and his antipathy would be for Diana Moon Glampers, the handicapped general, striving to prevent privilege. But Vonnegut suggests that the character he identifies with was not Bergeron, but Glampers. He begins his letter by first situating himself as not only an author with both conscious and unconscious intent, but as a reader. I can't be sure, but there's the possibility that my story, Harrison Bergeron, is about the envy and self-pity I felt in an overachiever's high school in Indianapolis quite a while ago. Some people never tame those emotions. John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald and David Chapman come to mind. Handicapper generals, if you like. So you could say it might have two meanings. The criticism of the government, but then also the criticism of the left. You could interpret this story in several different ways. That's why this story can be used in for different purposes, saying that communism is bad and it will ruin everything, because you have Harrison being kind of a loony a little bit. But then you also have Diana, is she actually keeping order? So you can really interpret that question whatever you would want. The fears of communism, forced classlessness, 1950s American conformity, pressure to look, live, and think alike. This was a time when you had your suburbs, everyone's lawn was kind of the same, everyone's house kind of looked the same in developments. Television culture that numbs viewers. So he was, like I said, against this television culture. So maybe you could also interpret it this was his ridiculing the television. You could say he's ridiculing whatever you think, and then you just have to provide the evidence or where you saw that in the story. Misreadings of equality that confuses equal rights with equal outcomes, forced from above. And then you would have, is Harrison heroic? You could answer this a lot of ways, because you could say he resists, frees the dancers, dies for showing people what they could be. After he forced them to do what he said, Anne brought that girl ballerina up to the ceiling and kissed her without really asking her. So that would be the no. Declares himself the emperor and demands obedience, replacing one tyranny with another. And the fact that he forced the ballerina to dance with him, you could say is very problematic from today's standpoint, but maybe not in the 1960s. Middle ground, his rebellion is brave, but his goal is self-glorification, not liberation. At 14, he's a tragic figure, more than a hero. His rebellion changes nothing. Even his parents forget, which could be Vonnegut's darkest point. And that point would maybe be in an authoritarian regime. One person, no matter how strong they are, can't really make the difference. You need the entire society. So you could say he was trying to wake up American readers to maybe pay more of attention into the ongoings of their governments and news cycles. But that would be it for Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut Jr.